Alright, Accounting 1 kiddos, welcome to Chapter 5. In Chapter 5, we kind of take a little bit of a segue away from the traditional transactions and posting of accounting, and we talk a little bit more about the banking side of things. So in Chapter 5, we're going to talk about checking accounts, bank reconciliations, recording dishonored checks, voided checks, and things like that. So in our first section here, we're going to work with our checking accounts. We're going to record a deposit on a check stub. We're also going to talk about the different types of endorsements, and then we're also going to prepare a check stub and a check. The thing to keep in mind is that on MindTap, things will look a little bit differently than they will on your workbook problem, and I think it's very important that you know how to do both, because obviously if you write a check, you don't write a check online, you write it on paper, so knowing how to do that correctly is important. So let's take a little look here and start talking about our checking accounts. So typically in accounting, anytime that we refer to money, we refer to it as cash. And the major cash payments are typically made by check. A business usually has a checking account and they still write checks. They might use debit cards. We haven't got to talking about those yet. We will a little bit later in this chapter. But the majority of the transactions that they pay for, they usually pay for using check. And then we also have small cash payments, usually for things like postage or some small supplies or like little miscellaneous things that they need for the office. And those come out of our petty cash fund. And again, we'll talk about that later as well. So the reason that they want to use a checking account is because there are certain issues related to cash that need to be addressed. So when you're recording cash, because of the amount of times that cash gets used, there is a higher chance that there's going to be errors. Okay, more recording errors because you have more volume of transactions related to cash. It's very easy to transfer ownership without any question. You know, you can give someone a $5 bill and forget very easily where it came from. And then, of course, you have the loss of cash as it's moved from place to place. So typically what businesses do is they keep their cash in a bank, and that's why we have checking accounts that they need to work with. So a business form that orders a bank to pay cash from a bank account is known as a check. And so the bank account from which those payments come from is called our checking account. Now, when you open a checking account, there's a couple of things that you're going to have to do. You're going to have to fill out a signature card, and you're also going to have to fill out a deposit slip. Now, the deposit slip is a special bank form that lists the checks, currency, and coins an account holder is adding into the bank account. Now, do we know the difference between checks, currency, and coins as they relate to the banking world? Well, checks are the business form or bank form we were just talking about, and we'll see one in a second if you've never seen a check before. Currency has to do with actual dollar bills, so ones, fives, tens, 20s, 50s, hundreds, and coins obviously has to do with coins, so that would be pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, half dollars, and dollar coins if you have those. So we put all the different types of forms of money that we would be adding to our account, and we fill that out on a deposit slip. So this is what the deposit slip looks like. Our Delgado Web Services banks at a bank called Billings National Bank in Billings, Montana. We put the date on it, and then we put $2,000 into our account from check number 22-1508 for a total of $2,000. Okay, so that's just an example of a deposit slip. So how we record that on our check stub, because this is actually the bank form. This is just, as you can see, a customer receipt. This is actually the check stub that we have attached to all of our checks. I wish that I could show you what a checkbook looks like for businesses, because it looks a little bit different than a checkbook that you maybe seen like your parents or grandparents write out of. It doesn't look the exact same. just a second. My dog is definitely squeaking on his toy. Okay, I'm back. So as I was saying, it looks a little bit different. It's actually like almost looks like a notebook. And then these pieces are on the far left-hand side, and then the actual check comes out this way, and we'll see this in a second. But this is called the check stub. So we write the amount deposited right here, and only if we're making deposits. If we don't make a deposit, then we don't add anything on that check stub. But if we do, like we added this $2,000, then we need to update our subtotal in our checking account, which is what this subtotal box is for. So these are just the steps that you would go through: writing your balance, put your date, and writing the amount of the deposit, and then calculate your new subtotal. Now, anytime that you are going to cash a check, you have to do what's called an endorsement on that check. And so an endorsement is a signature or stamp on the back of a check that transfers ownership. There are 3 types of commonly used endorsements. You will need to know all 3. The first one is a blank endorsement, the second is a special endorsement, and the third is a restrictive endorsement. The blank endorsement is an endorsement that consists only of the endorser's signature. So when a check is made out to Michael Delgado, what Michael does is Michael signs the back of the check with his first and last name, and then that essentially turns the check into cash. And for that reason, a blank endorsement should only be used when a person is literally at the bank teller window and ready to transfer ownership. Because if you had signed the back of a check right away and then misplaced it and someone found it, that's literally like picking up a $50 bill. Okay, anybody could bring it anywhere because it's been signed. It doesn't necessarily have to be you. So be very careful about when you use a blank endorsement, where you're at. Do it when you're at the bank ready to turn it over. The second one is a special endorsement. A special endorsement essentially indicates a new owner of a check. So sometimes, and these aren't typically used very often, but especially in personal banking, in business banking, they're used more often. But essentially what this is doing is it is transferring the ownership from Michael to Helen. So what we do is we use the words pay to the order of. We write the new owner of the check, and then ourselves or Michael would sign their name saying that they have now transferred the ownership over to Helen. And the third endorsement is called a restrictive endorsement. A restrictive endorsement is where we restrict any further transfer of that check's ownership. So it goes only to our bank account is typically what we do. So we would write the words for deposit only to the account of, and if you know your account number, you can write your account number, or you can write whatever the owner of that checking account is. And for us, it's Delgado Web Services. And again, we still put our signature for whoever it was written out to. So all this does is it limits the use of the check to whatever purpose is stated on the endorsement. So it can't get transferred anymore, and it doesn't act like cash. It goes directly into the bank account for Delgado. Now, the reason that we complete checks and check stubs is that oftentimes businesses are going to use pre-printed checks that have consecutive numbers on them. If you've seen any sort of checks before, you know that they start and they run in consecutive numbers. It's just an easy way to identify each check and also to keep track of where each check went. A check stub is a business record for each check written for a cash payment. That's our accounting concept of objective evidence, so it's very important that we do this. And so to avoid forgetting to prepare a check stub, you always want to prepare the check stub before you write out the check. And I can't stress this enough because you will forget to do the check stub. It's just a common thing that happens. You will forget to do it. So do it first, then fill out your check. So your steps to complete your check stub look like this. First, we want to write the amount of the check on the check stub. Okay, this is going to go in the space where we have the dollar sign at the top of the stub. The second thing we're going to want to do is write the date of the check on the stub. Obviously, this goes on the date line with the month, day, and year. And thirdly, we write to whom the check is to be paid. This goes on the to line at the top of the stub. The fourth thing we do is we record the purpose of the check on the stub, which is going to go where it says the for line. And then we write the amount of the check on the stub, again written in the amount column where it says amount this check. And then we calculate our new balance by doing our subtotal minus the amount of this check. Now these are the steps, and I listed them out like this so that you can remember them and have an easy place to find them. When you do it, this is what I was just talking about. So here's step 1, where we have the amount of the check. 2 is the date, January 2nd of 20 --. Third step was who it's written to, which is Eastside Supplies. Fourth thing is what it was for. It was for supplies. The fifth thing is to write the amount of the check. The amount of the check is $165. And then the sixth thing that we do is calculate our new balance. Now remember, this was the deposit that we already did earlier. So that's where that $2,000 came from. We don't have to do anything with it now because we've already done it previously. It's a little bit different. But the reason we do this first is because remember, this check is going to get torn off and given to Eastside Supplies. If we did not complete that check stub first and you forget to do it, then you have no information about this check whatsoever. And as accountants, that's not good because we need to have objective evidence. So that's really important that you remember to do this first before filling out your check. So your steps to complete a check are very similar to that of filling out your check stub. Excuse me. So the first thing we're going to do is write the date that the check is issued. So again, we do our month, we do our date, and we do our year. There is such a thing as called a post-dated check. A post-dated check actually means a check that has a future date. So if you were in October right now and you maybe wanted to wait until November, but you wanted to give them the check, some people would write like November 1st, and that's called a post-dated check. However, most banks are not going to accept these. They have to be written on the day that you're there or previously, having already passed that date. You don't usually get to write things in the future. Secondly, we write to whom the person we're paying. That goes on the paid to the order of line on the check. It could be a business or it could be an individual, either or. Just make sure that you spell things correctly. The third thing is that we have to write the amount in figures. So we're going to use the following where it has the dollar sign. We want to write this as close to the dollar sign as possible to try to prevent any additional numbers from being written in there in case someone were to get a hold of the check. The fourth thing we do is write the amount in words. So on the line where it says dollars, this is where we verify the amount that is written in figures. So there's always two, and if they don't actually equal, then the bank is not going to accept your check. So if it were $100, you write 100, and then on the line below that, you would write $100 and no cents. And so it's very important that we have both of those equal. And then on the for line, it sometimes can also be referred to as the memo. You can write what the purpose of the check was for. And then the last thing is obviously to sign it, which is on the blank line in the lower right-hand corner. So again, as I just stated, our date goes up here, number 1, January 2nd of 20 --. We write to whom the check is for, which is Eastside Supplies. We write the amount in figures, which is $165. That goes over here, and the number numerical place. And then we also have the place where we write it in words. So we have to write out 165 and no 100. No 100 means no cents. When you do this in MindTap, it is kind of finicky, and we'll talk about that when we do our work together. If you have questions, you can always ask to see the key to make sure that you're writing things incorrectly. And then Lastly, we have the purpose of the check, and then